Dr. Morgan, do you deny manipulating my memories to make me believe my father abused me? Sarah's voice cracked as she stood in the middle of my waiting room, phone recording our conversation, her lawyer hovering by her side like a predatory shadow. 3 of my current patients sat frozen on the plush blue couches, witnessing everything with wide eyes. The receptionist, Marge, who'd worked with me for 12 years, was frantically dialing security, her face drained of color. My stomach dropped through the floor as if the building had suddenly collapsed beneath me. Sarah Wilson. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years, since we'd completed her therapy for anxiety and childhood trauma. The therapy I thought had been successful. The therapy I'd actually presented as a case study at last year's conference on trauma recovery. The therapy that had launched the most recent phase of my career. Sarah, My professional demeanor was slipping like a mask in a windstorm, hands trembling slightly as I tried to process what was happening. The room seemed to tilt sideways. 20 years of maintaining composure in the face of patients' crises, and now I was the one struggling to breathe. This isn't the appropriate place to. My father lost everything because of you. She was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. Her voice had taken on a raw, wounded quality that silenced everyone in the room. He lost his job at the university, his reputation in the community. My mother divorced him after 30 years of marriage, and now I remember it never happened. None of it. You planted those memories in my head during those sessions. The lawyer, perfectly tailored suit, wire-rimmed glasses, the picture of calculated aggression, stepped forward, extending a document with manicured precision. Dr. Rachel Morgan, this is formal notice that you're being sued for malpractice, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress in the amount of $2,300,000. We're also filing a complaint with the state licensing board today. A flash popped in my peripheral vision, then another. Two people were taking pictures with their phones. Mrs. Abernathy, a patient I'd been treating for PTSD for 3 years, was one of them. Tomorrow, I'd be trending on social media, my face attached to accusations of mind manipulation, my 20-year career potentially over in an instant. How did I get here? I helped people heal their deepest wounds. I didn't destroy lives and families. At least, that's what I thought. That's what was engraved on the plaque they gave me last year when I was named Boston's Therapist of the Year. That's what the thank you cards lining my office shelf proclaimed in grateful handwriting. I couldn't sleep that night. Not even close. The accusation kept playing in my head like a broken record. The words, "You planted those memories," echoing through my consciousness at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4:30 a.m. I'd built my reputation meticulously over 2 decades as one of Boston's most respected trauma therapists. After my own sister's struggle with unprocessed childhood trauma, I dedicated my life to this field. I specialized in helping people recover from childhood abuse, particularly those with repressed or fragmented memories, the hardest cases that other therapists often referred to me. My techniques were evidence-based, regression therapy combined with cognitive behavioral approaches, mindfulness techniques, and careful documentation. I'd published papers in the Journal of Traumatic Stress and the American Journal of Psychiatry. I'd helped hundreds of patients rebuild shattered lives. Had I somehow led Sarah to false conclusions? The question made my chest tighten as I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above my bed. Had I wanted to find trauma so badly that I'd suggested it where none existed? Had my own history, watching my sister struggle after our neighbor had molested her, colored my clinical judgment? Had I been seeing monsters where there were none? My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, the screen illuminating my darkened bedroom every few minutes. I finally checked it at 5:13 a.m. The video was already going viral, shared across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok with vicious captions, "Therapist accused of implanting false memories and destroying family. Mind manipulation in therapy exposed." Someone had even created a hashtag #FalseDrMorgan. My colleagues were texting, some supportive. "This is a witch hunt. Rachel, stay strong." Others distancing themselves already. "I think it's best we postpone our research collaboration until this is resolved." By morning, I'd watched the sun rise through bloodshot eyes. The damage control phase began with clinical precision. My lawyer, Eleanor, a sharp-minded woman who specialized in medical malpractice, advised against making any public statements. "Every word you say now can and will be twisted," she warned over the phone, her voice grave. "Let me do the talking." The clinic director, Dr. Patel, called an emergency meeting at 7:30 a.m. I arrived at the office through the back entrance to avoid any potential media. 3 patients had already canceled their appointments. My assistant looked at me with a mixture of concern and uncertainty, as if I were a bomb that might detonate. "The board is initiating an investigation, Rachel," Dr. Patel said, her normally warm face grave as marble. She straightened papers on her desk that didn't need straightening. "They've expedited the process given the publicity. The video had over 200,000 views by this morning. News outlets are picking it up. I'm sorry, but we'll need to suspend your practice pending their findings. Effective immediately." I stared at her, numb, as if watching myself from across the room. 20 years of work, a career built patient by patient, conference by conference, study by study, now balanced on the edge of a cliff. "This can't be happening," I whispered, more to myself than to her. I never suggested any specific memories to Sarah. Never. We worked through what she brought to the sessions. I documented everything meticulously. Dr. Patel slid a printout across the desk. It was a transcript from the video, now being quoted in online articles. "The videos don't look good, Rachel. She's claiming you used leading questions and hypnotic techniques to make her believe her father molested her when she was 8. She says you told her that memory gaps are almost always signs of repressed trauma." "That's not what happened," I insisted, my voice rising slightly. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. "I would never say almost always. That's not how memory works, and I know that." But even as I said it, doubts crept in like a cold fog. Had I used those exact words in a moment of therapeutic zeal? Was I absolutely certain about every question I'd asked over dozens of hours of therapy? Had I been careful enough with a vulnerable young woman seeking answers about her own life? That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by file boxes and scattered papers like an academic crime scene. The overhead light cast harsh shadows as night fell outside. I'd pulled every note, every assessment, every journal entry from Sarah's treatment 2 years ago. A half-empty glass of wine sat untouched on my desk. I'd poured it and then forgotten it as I dove into the files. I needed to understand what had happened. If I'd made a mistake, if I'd fallen into confirmation bias or suggestion, I needed to know. I remembered the Sarah who had first come to me. 25 years old, anxious, depressed, struggling with intimacy issues that were interfering with her new engagement. Beautiful, bright, but with haunted eyes. She was working on her master's degree in education, wanted to teach elementary school. She'd mentioned early on, almost casually, that she had gaps in her childhood memories, particularly around age 8. "It's like a blackout period," she'd said in our 3rd session. "Mom says I was a happy kid, but I can't remember much from that whole year." Over our sessions, 32 in total, she gradually recovered memories of her father coming into her room at night. The details had emerged slowly, painfully, often accompanied by panic attacks so severe I'd had to use grounding techniques to bring her back to the present. "He would sit on the edge of the bed," she'd whispered in session 12. By session 20, she'd remembered more graphic details that made me wince even as I maintained my therapeutic neutral expression. I'd been careful, hadn't I? I flipped through my session notes, written in my precise handwriting. I'd documented my techniques, my questions. Nothing stood out as inappropriate or leading. But memory was fragile. We taught that in Psychology 101. Every psychologist worth their license knew that memories weren't recordings, but reconstructions, vulnerable to suggestion, confirmation bias, and a dozen other cognitive quirks. The literature on false memories had grown substantially in the past decade. Elizabeth Loftus's research had shown how easily memories could be implanted. But I'd been cautious, hadn't I? I prided myself on my scientific approach. After reviewing my notes for hours, eyes burning, back stiff, I made a decision at 2:18 a.m. I wouldn't just defend myself with denial and counterattacks. I would investigate thoroughly, scientifically, objectively. If I had made a mistake, even unconsciously, I needed to face it. I owed that to Sarah, to my other patients, to my profession, and to myself. The next morning, after a quick shower that did little to refresh me, I called Dr. Marcus Chin, a colleague who specialized in memory research at Harvard. We'd co-presented at conferences, but weren't close friends, which made him perfect for this. I needed someone with expertise who wouldn't pull punches out of loyalty. Marcus, I need your help reviewing my methods, I said, pacing my kitchen with coffee in hand. And I need brutal honesty, not collegiality. I saw the news, Rachel. The videos everywhere. His voice was guarded. This is a mess. I know. That's why I need someone who understands memory formation. Will you help? There was a pause that made my heart sink. Being associated with me now carried risk. Finally, yes, I'll help. Send me your protocols, your session notes with identifying information redacted, and let's talk. But Rachel, I'm going to be completely objective here. If I find problems, I won't sugarcoat them. That's exactly what I need, I said, exhaling. Thank you. While waiting for Marcus's assessment, I began the grueling process of reviewing recordings of other sessions with patients who had recovered abuse memories. Massachusetts law allowed for one-party consent recording, and I had always recorded sessions with patient permission for therapeutic purposes, never imagining I'd be reviewing them someday to defend my practice. My home office became a bunker. I ordered takeout that went cold as I listened to hour after hour of therapy sessions, taking meticulous notes on my questioning techniques, my responses, my tone. The windows stayed closed against the April air despite the stuffiness of the room. I didn't want neighbors overhearing these private sessions. 3 days in, running on caffeine and determination, I found something disturbing. In a session with a patient from 5 years ago, a young woman with symptoms similar to Sarah's, I heard myself say, when abuse happens at a young age, the mind often blocks it out as protection. That's a survival mechanism. These gaps in your memory around age 10, that's often where trauma hides. I paused the recording, my finger trembling on the keyboard, feeling suddenly nauseated. The statement sounded so definitive coming from my mouth. Had I been priming my patients to find trauma where none existed? I'd been stating what I believed to be a clinical observation based on research and experience, but could it have acted as suggestion? Was I hearing the voice of a zealot rather than a scientist? I played more recordings, listening with new, critical ears, wincing occasionally at my own voice. Most sessions seemed appropriate, professional, careful. But there were moments, subtle nudges, the slight enthusiasm in my voice when patients made connections that aligned with trauma narratives, the way I sometimes spent more time exploring abuse possibilities than alternative explanations, that now seemed questionable in light of Sarah's accusations. You're on a witch hunt against yourself, Eleanor, my lawyer, warned when I called her with my concerns. Don't do their job for them. But I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about legal liability anymore. It was about the integrity of my life's work. Marcus's assessment came a week later, delivered in person at a quiet cafe far from my practice. His face was grave as he slid a folder across the table. Rachel, you're not intentionally leading patients, he began, his academic precision evident in every carefully chosen word. I want to be clear about that. But there are concerns. He opened the folder to show me highlighted transcripts and analysis. Your questioning technique sometimes assumes trauma rather than exploring all possibilities equally. And your regression methods, they're within accepted practice, but they're on the edge of what current research supports for memory recovery. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I needed the truth. My hands curled around my coffee mug for warmth, though the April day wasn't cold. So I could have influenced Sarah's memories? Created a narrative that wasn't there. It's possible, he admitted, removing his glasses and cleaning them, a nervous habit I'd noticed before when he delivered difficult news at conferences. Not deliberately, but influence happens in subtle ways we're only beginning to fully understand. The power dynamic between therapist and patient is significant. They want to please us, to find answers we seem to be looking for. They pick up on our micro-expressions, our tone shifts, which questions we pursue and which we let drop. I stared out the window at people walking by, normal people having normal days. I've spent 20 years helping people recover from trauma, Marcus. What if I've been creating it instead? He leaned forward. Don't catastrophize. Most of your work is solid. But in cases like Sarah's, high suggestibility, eager to please, desperate for answers about vague symptoms, the risk of memory contamination increases exponentially. As the investigation proceeded through its second month, more patients came forward, not all with complaints, but with questions about their own recovered memories. Did we really uncover what happened to me, or did you guide me there? Asked one woman who'd been in therapy with me for childhood sexual abuse. The clinic was fielding calls daily. My professional reputation was unraveling thread by thread. It's the Salem witch trials all over again, Dr. Patel said during one of our update meetings. Once someone suggests memory manipulation, suddenly everyone questions everything. My lawyer, Eleanor, was growing increasingly frustrated with my reluctance to take the easy way out. We should settle with Sarah quickly, she insisted during a tense meeting in her downtown office. Offer a reasonable sum with a non-disclosure agreement. Limit the damage before this goes any further. No, I said firmly, ignoring her exasperated expression. I need to understand what happened. If I made mistakes, I need to know exactly what they were, not just for this case, but for all my patients. That's the researcher in you talking, Eleanor replied. The practical reality is that prolonging this investigation puts your entire career at risk. I knew she was right, but I couldn't bring myself to take the easy path. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about every patient who had ever trusted me with their most vulnerable moments. A breakthrough came from an unexpected direction 2 days later. Dr. Lisa Kaufman, a colleague who knew Sarah from a support group she ran at Mass General, called me privately. Rachel, I shouldn't be telling you this, she said, her voice low as if someone might overhear the phone call. But before coming to you, Sarah had briefly seen a therapist at West Side Psychological Services. She only mentioned it once in group, said it didn't work out. I thought you should know. West Side Psychological Services, a competing practice run by Dr. James Harmon, who had built his reputation as a vocal critic of memory recovery therapy. He'd written op-eds calling practitioners like me modern-day witch doctors and had testified against therapists in similar cases. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone. Was this mere coincidence, or something more calculated? Could Sarah have been influenced by Harmon's well-known stance against recovered memory therapy? After debating the ethics, I hired a private investigator, a retired police detective named Miguel Santos, with kind eyes and methodical habits. I'm not looking to destroy this young woman, I explained. I just need to understand the full picture. A week later, Santos discovered that Sarah was now working part-time at West Side as an administrative assistant. The job had started 3 months ago, right around when she'd begun claiming her memories were false. Was this a coincidence, or something more calculated? I had to tread carefully, suggesting a conspiracy would look like desperate deflection from a therapist unwilling to accept responsibility. I'd seen other professionals go down that road and lose all credibility. Santos dug deeper with quiet efficiency and found something else, something I hadn't expected. Police reports from Sarah's childhood. When she was 9, neighbors in their suburban Brookline neighborhood had called police reporting suspected abuse after Sarah had shown up at their door late one night in her pajamas, seemingly disoriented and afraid to go home. The investigation had been inconclusive. Sarah's father, a respected English professor, had provided a plausible explanation about sleepwalking, and Sarah herself had been unwilling or unable to articulate what had frightened her. The report had been filed away, the case closed without charges. But it raised serious questions about Sarah's current claim that the abuse memories were entirely fabricated during our therapy. When I shared this with Eleanor, spreading the police report across her mahogany desk, she warned me with practiced caution. "This doesn't prove the memories were real, Rachel. These childhood investigations often don't have clear conclusions. The presence of a report merely shows someone was concerned enough to call authorities." "But it suggests something happened," I insisted, tapping the paper where the officer had noted Sarah's unusual reluctance to return home. "Something that could have been the seed of real memories, not ones I fabricated. Something that happened long before she ever set foot in my office." Eleanor leaned back in her leather chair. "Or it suggests a child who had a nightmare and sleepwalked, just as her father claimed. Don't build a narrative that fits what you want to believe. That's exactly what you're being accused of doing with Sarah's memories." Her words hit home like a slap. Was I now doing exactly what I was accused of? Seeing patterns that supported my preferred conclusion? 2 months into the investigation, after sleepless nights and endless preparation with Eleanor, I was called to a formal hearing with the state licensing board. The proceedings would be closed to the press, but would determine the future of my career. The hearing room was austere, wood-paneled walls, a long elevated table where 7 board members sat in judgment, uncomfortable chairs for the witnesses. The air conditioning hummed too loudly. I wore my most professional navy suit, hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. Eleanor sat beside me, a fortress of binders organized with color-coded tabs. I brought my complete case notes, the police reports, and Dr. Chen's assessment of my methods. I also brought something else that Eleanor had initially advised against, a comprehensive proposal for new guidelines on memory work in therapy. "They're not here to consider policy reforms," she'd argued. "They're here to judge your specific conduct. I need to show them I'm thinking beyond my own case," I'd insisted. "That I care about the field." As the hearing began, the board's legal counsel outlined the complaint against me with clinical precision. Sarah herself testified, her voice steady now, articulating her belief that I had guided her toward false memories through suggestive questioning and reinforcement. When I would describe vague feelings or dreams, Dr. Morgan would get excited, she explained. When I questioned whether these fragments were real memories, she would assure me that the mind protects itself by hiding trauma. When my turn came, I stood before the board, heart racing but voice controlled. I didn't just defend myself, I acknowledged the limitations of my approach. While I maintained that I did not deliberately lead Sarah Wilson to false conclusions, I began, making eye contact with each board member. I recognized that memory work carries inherent risks that perhaps I didn't fully appreciate until now. The research on memory malleability is clear and evolving rapidly. As therapists, we can unconsciously influence what patients recall, even when we're trying to be neutral. Through body language, through which threads we choose to pursue, through subtle reinforcement. The room was silent except for the scratch of pens taking notes. I continued, voice growing stronger. I've spent the past 2 months engaged in painful self-examination, reviewing session recordings, consulting with experts like Dr. Marcus Chen of Harvard, whose assessment I've included in your materials. I've identified areas where my practice could improve. Where all of our practices could improve. I propose stricter protocols, mandatory video recording of regression sessions, peer consultation requirements for cases involving memory recovery, more explicit informed consent about the limitations of memory recovery, and regular method audits by colleagues not involved in the case. Whether or not I keep my license, I concluded, my voice cracking slightly before I studied it, these safeguards should be implemented to protect patients and practitioners alike. Because even when our intentions are pure, the human mind, both the therapists and the patients, is susceptible to bias and influence. We need systems that acknowledge this reality rather than pretending we can achieve perfect objectivity. The board members exchanged glances. Dr. Watkins, the chair, leaned forward. Dr. Morgan, this is unexpected. Most practitioners in your position focus solely on defending their specific actions. I could do that, I replied honestly. I could point to my detailed notes, to the police report from Sarah's childhood that suggests something traumatic may indeed have occurred, to my consistent record with hundreds of other patients. But that defensive approach doesn't address the larger questions this case raises about our field. And what would you say directly to Ms. Wilson? Asked Dr. Rivera, the only psychologist on the board. I turned toward Sarah, who sat stiffly in the gallery. I would say that I never intended to implant false memories, but that I cannot know with certainty what happened in your childhood, nor can you, nor can anyone. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. If my methods contributed to a reconstruction that caused you pain, then regardless of intention, I am deeply sorry. The formal decision came 3 weeks later via certified mail. I opened it in my kitchen, hands trembling so badly I tore the envelope. My license was reinstated, but with a 1-year probationary period and supervision requirement for any cases involving memory recovery. I was also asked to help develop new guidelines for trauma therapy based on my proposals, an acknowledgement that the issue extended beyond my individual practice. Sarah's lawsuit continued, but with a new dimension. The evidence of the prior police investigation had complicated her claim that the memories were entirely fabricated. Public opinion, which had initially condemned me completely, began to show cracks as more nuanced articles appeared questioning the science of memory itself rather than just my practices. After 3 more months of legal maneuvering that drained both our bank accounts and emotional reserves, Sarah's lawyer approached Eleanor about mediation. They're willing to talk, Eleanor told me over the phone. I think the police report gave them pause. Plus, the licensing board's decision not to revoke your license weakens their position. On a rainy Tuesday in September, 6 months later, I stood at a podium at the American Psychological Association convention, presenting my research and the new guidelines I'd helped develop. My practice had changed. I now worked with a consultation team, recorded all sessions, and used more neutral questioning techniques. Memory isn't a video recording, I told the audience of fellow therapists. It's a reconstruction influenced by suggestion, expectation, and the very act of remembering. As healers, we must approach it with humility and skepticism, even as we validate our patients' experiences. After the presentation, a young therapist approached me. Your case was covered in our ethics class, she said. It must have been terrible going through that. I smiled. It was the hardest experience of my career, but sometimes we need our foundations shaken to build something stronger. As I packed up my materials, I noticed an email from Sarah on my phone. It was brief. I'm still not sure what really happened in my childhood, but I'm finding peace with uncertainty. Thank you for being willing to question yourself. It helped me question myself, too. That night in my hotel room, I reflected on how quickly a career could unravel and how, sometimes, unraveling leads to necessary reweaving. The truth about Sarah's memories remained ambiguous, but the truth about my practice had become clearer. In helping people face their pasts, I had to recognize the power I wielded, power to heal, but also to distort. I opened my laptop and began typing notes for my next research project, Therapeutic Humility. Navigating the uncertain terrain of memory. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for words that would acknowledge both the importance of trauma work and its inherent limitations. Sometimes the most important clinical skill is knowing what we don't know. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.